Welcome to the eCom Collab Club podcast, where operators, risk takers, and battle-tested founders drop the lessons that cost them time, money, and their sanity, and share what actually works so you don't have to pay the same price. Hosted by Peter Gardner and Adam Pearce, founders of the eCom Collab Club and Blend Commerce, the Shopify CRO agency, and proudly sponsored by OmniSend. Email and SMS marketing so good, it's boring.
So let's set the scene. So costs are up, growth sluggish, forecast, well, chaos. Now, if your P&L at the moment feels like a trampoline, you are not alone. And the question is, how do you keep a brand healthy, both financially and mentally, when the economy keeps moving the goalposts? Well, today, folks, we have got Rob Manning from Biotiful Gut Health in the chair, and he's steering D2C and marketplace channels to the UK's #1 kefir brand with the market whiplashes. And true story, I today am powered by the cherry flavor of this morning. So today, guys, we are digging into growth versus profit, tough decisions nobody brags about, and staying strategically calm when every spreadsheet screams panic. Rob, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Rob, good to have you on. So if anybody hasn't yet stalked you on LinkedIn, who are you? What did 2 decades in digital teach you? And how did that journey land you running online sales for a booming gut health brand?
I mean, firstly, when you refer to it as 2 decades, it's making me feel very old now. So thank you for that.
I thought you might say that, Rob.
But sure. So yes, 25 years actually. I've been working across digital. So I started straight out of university. Was keen to get into the world of advertising and marketing. Tried to get into some of the bigger London agencies. Have a degree in English, so really, kind of no relevance or direct relevance from a marketing or a e-com perspective specifically. And a lot of them sort of said, get out into the regions because you're going to find it easier unless you want to do 2-3 years worth of free work as an intern, which I wasn't keen on. So I joined a local agency, my path into digital was the chief executive at the time looking at me going, "You're very young. You must understand this digital stuff. We've just talked to on BT about something to do with CRM. We think you'd be good to run that program for us. Off you go." And that was pretty much it. So, I was introduced quite early, we had about 1.5 million customer records that we were looking to play with. Started to understand segmentation. I mean, this is the days when Excel only did 68,000 rows as well. So you had to get good at your Excel formulas pretty quick. And it started from there, really. So, kind of particularly around web and content management systems, which just sort of, being talked about, like say CRM databases, platforms, and email marketing. In fact, when I first started, you created your email in Outlook and you sent it to a distribution list on the server, and then it just forwarded it on. And I do remember coming in one morning to everything having fallen over and a lot of angry messages where it had got stuck and it kept repeating. And each person on the database received around about 275 copies of the same email until thankfully our server fell over and it couldn't send any more out. So a bit of a very early kind of pain point from an email perspective of making sure that you check everything's working before you leave the office for the day anyway.
I love that.
Yeah. So I grew up really then with digital. So started then as we got into search marketing, the beginning of Google Analytics, Google AdWords as it started to come in, Facebook, social media advertising, marketing, and those channels started to kind of push and drive through into more and more understanding in terms of kind of data segmentation, and really then sort of followed that through moving from execution. So I started doing a lot of on-site updates, building campaigns, kind of pulling together, working with the creative teams in the studio, to actually kind of create the campaigns. And about 10 years ago, everything started getting a bit specialist. So then all of a sudden I noticed within our agency, we've got SEO specialists, PPC specialists, social media specialists, organic specialists, affiliate marketing specialists, CRO specialists, and and it started to kind of build up. And I was like, I don't really want to specialize. I quite like doing all of it. And that's why ecom, kind of really started to become my sort of home, really, because, with ecom, you still get to think about, right, customer acquisition, who am I talking to? What's the proposition? How do we actually get them to the website in the first place? UX, UI design, conversion rate optimization. How do we make sure that we're, kind of making the most out of all of that traffic that we're paying to drive through to the website? How do we get people from A to B to C, kind of as slick and fast and simple as possible, with delivering a good experience? The CRM and the retention piece, in terms of then what does this post-purchase journey look like? So how do we kind of keep everything going and build up from a loyalty and LTV perspective? And it was within that specialism that I then, at the time I was working for Reckitt, they were one of my clients. The role of head of direct consumer Europe came up. The previous counterpart was looking to move over to the North America team. The GM at the time, who I knew quite well at that point, was like, once upon a time you mentioned you wanted to do client side rather than agency side. I was like, yeah. Why don't you come and, kind of pick up this role? Started having a few conversations. Again, it kind of was offering me all of the stuff that I've been doing from a front end perspective within ecom, but then a lot more exposure in terms of more of the strategic side, in terms of like, how do you even get to think about launching a direct to consumer and an ecom website, but also, kind of everything to do with manufacturing a product. And from a commercial perspective, I mean, again, that's probably my second biggest baptism of fire, which is just understanding how commercial you need to be, from the manufacturing, the CPG side, like understanding, kind of the unit P&L to its, kind of degree of depth, and particularly, I don't Reckitt, I'm sure it's the same in the other, kind of big CPG companies, but, you're expected to know your number all the time. Where is it going to go to? What are the risks? What are the opportunities? How do we hit to drive it? And that type of it. I mean, I kid you not, literally, if you didn't start your sort of any internal presentation with a P&L of what this was actually going to deliver, then, you didn't even have the room's attention in terms of, actually getting to what you wanted to do. So that commercial element was really, really, kind of driving through. And then from there, although I had a great time at Reckitt, really enjoyed working with them, but had the opportunity to join Biotiful, and they didn't really have anything from an ecom perspective. So, they had bits and pieces being done across sort of online grocery, Tesco's.com, Sainsbury's.co.uk, Ocado, Waitrose, kind of, etc. But there wasn't really, any core sort of focus on it. They were also looking to launch a new ambient product, so a range of gut health powders. Natasha, the founder, was very, very keen in order to actually develop her own D2C channel, in order to start to kind of drive that out and start to, push and, kind of prove the case for the product, to then obviously, kind of engage with the wider partners and retailers and wholesalers in terms of, kind of conversations around it. So that's really kind of my journey in terms of how I went through, and how I am where I am. I think one of the key things, topical to, today's conversation is, because I am old, as we pointed out at the very beginning, so thank you for that again. It's been through the mill economically, so, when I first joined, I first joined, was it 99, 2000, the very first agency I went for, .com boom, bubble, bust, thank you very much, was literally after about 14 months of being in agency side, was redundant, looking for another job, kind of trying to find another role. So, luckily, I had because the agency went bust, I had, what should we say, a dowry of some clients who were kind of keen for projects to be finished off. So I managed to move quite easily from sort of one BT rostered agency through to another one, which was Jacob Bailey, where I spent then 17 years, and went from account manager to managing partner, kind of over my time there. But, .com boom, first of all, then 7 years later, kind of the Great Recession of 2007 through to 2009. So again, kind of from an agency perspective, marketing spend budget, always the first one to go. We definitely started feeling that in terms of, a lot of clients, starting to, really just put the brakes on, start to push projects out, not to commit, or, before you knew it, kind of a couple of clients, and a few of them were sort of disappearing, going bust, which was always unfortunate, but a very, very rocky and very unstable time. Just as I joined Reckitt then as well, obviously 2000 had COVID. I mean, from a eCom perspective, in many of our kind of areas, it was great, right? Kind of we had that kind of huge and massive kind of spike that started to come through for some brands, but not for all. So again, it was a very challenging time in terms of really thinking about, okay, well, kind of, I mean, we had 14 different markets, brands, etc., as we were going across. So, but it was really a case of, some of them were on, particularly within like the infant nutrition space. I mean, they were on like high alert, just trying to get as much stock as possible, trying to get it out to consumers. Dettol trying to produce as much stock as possible in order to get it out. And then brands like kind of Finish and Durex, and particularly kind of anything in the cold and cough and cold space. Again, people won't go anywhere. If it wasn't COVID, they weren't particularly interested in any type of medicine. So again, it was just that huge imbalance from a brand perspective. On one hand, you had these brands which are just booming and you couldn't keep up, and then on the other hand, kind of we had the brands which were like, how on earth are we going to actually kind of keep this going through that time, as it started to come in, and to where we are now, right? So cost of living crisis, certainly been kind of moving and pushing, over the last, well, probably at least the last kind of couple of years, really is impacting in terms of how much money people have got. Disposable income is going down, and to your note, coming in somehow, cost of acquisition, cost of all the marketing just keeps going up and up and up and up. And somehow from an ecom perspective, we've got to navigate it, right, and try and push for growth, but without completely destroying the bottom line.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Rob, thank you so much for that nice detailed background. I think a lot of us have got a good picture of your background and your experience in this right now. And I've got a couple of questions just following up with what you said there. You've obviously switched from agency to brand side. Would you ever go back?
Do you know what? It's a question I ask myself a lot, and the answer is no. I don't think I would. I miss the consultancy element. So when you're agency side, you just get that breadth of experience you can't get anywhere else, right? So one day you're working on kind of CPG brand, and then it could be a skincare brand, and then, well, in my case, it could have been an industrial manufacturing brand, or kind of. So it was just so broad and varied as it started to come in, because as an agency, we specialized in terms of kind of brand and digital, so it wasn't sector kind of specific, so it really did get that breadth. And I absolutely loved that part of agency, where you had to go from like naught to expert in a sector or a category in like a week between getting a brief and going to pitch in terms of what you were going to do, and kind of what the strategy was based in and how it all worked together. So I did love that side to it, but I think that the part I love also on the client side, which I think will keep me in, is just the more, I guess it's that more top level strategy in terms of actually where do we want to be going in terms of innovation and NPD and product development, because again, how do we actually kind of get in and start to understand, and from an ecom perspective as well, start to think about how do we build and create kind of, I guess, ecom specific products. I've always worked within omni-channel companies as well, right? So I've never had the pleasure of working for a pure D2C, but even down to when I was working with Finish. Finish are big bags of dishwasher tablets, right? I mean, it's like 50 to 80. It comes like this. So everybody here who's on ecom is going to know that is big, bulky, and expensive to ship. Actually, when we kind of sat there and thought, well, we've got 50 tabs in a bag, if I flatten this out, and this is what I actually did as well. I went down to the post office and I bought one of the A4, kind of letterbox boxes. I brought it back into the office and we sat down and we, tipped out into it and spread it around. We kind of got it down and they took it back to see if we could actually mail it, kind of out and get it through. Because if we could get it into that letterbox format, the cost of distribution or cost of postage went from like 270, 280 down to about £1.19. So from a margin perspective, that had a huge impact. And also, even from a consumer experience perspective, right, it goes through most letterboxes, not all, but most letterboxes. So again, it wasn't then a box that's being delivered or sat out on your kind of on your doorstep waiting for you to get home. So I think kind of for me, kind of involvement in kind of that side to the CPG businesses that I'm now in, it gets that bit going, kind of that kind of pushing and building, and I think I would miss that more if I moved back.
And then one painful but pivotal lesson from agency life that now shapes your leadership role now.
Stakeholder engagement is absolutely key, across all of it, really. I think, I think the one part that I always had with an agency is that, and you guys will know this well, is that the strength is in the relationship, right, with the client. So yes, you're going to do fantastic work, but the strength comes in terms of the relationship, kind of how well you can understand their needs, requirements, what needs to be done. And if you don't have, kind of that good relationship from a client perspective, then, it puts an account at risk, even if you're doing great work. I've seen it in my past. It's like, we all make mistakes, right? And I've made tons of them, kind of over my career. But if you've got a really good relationship with a client, and you make a mistake, like actually you've got the way to resolve it, but kind of you can do it without really putting that account at risk. But if that relationship's not there, then you're always on that. They're just waiting for that one mistake in order to then bring normally an agency that they want to work with or someone different in. And it was no different really in terms of coming in, to the client side. You sort of say you get the opportunity to have these conversations, but particularly working in a larger organization, larger matrix organization, I very quickly realized there's two ways of getting stuff done in terms of speed of Reckitt. There was the fast way, which is basically spend a good few weeks lobbying the right people, understanding what the impact is going to be from them, get your numbers right in terms of the commercials, build out that business case, kind of, and sell it in. And then actually when you start to table ideas, opportunities, new propositions, whatever it is you want to do, that can really help smooth that path, kind of through, get the right level of support for it. If you just sort of go into a room and start to try and, kind of bulldoze through, kind of a new idea, then, 6 to 9 months later, you're still trying to get that off the ground because you just hit that resistance level. So yeah, for me, that kind of, not just the managing up, but the managing sideways, kind of, as well as managing down, I think was a key lesson from agency side that's kind of served me well now moving client side.
I mean, Rob, on that, guess that decision-making aspect there, thinking about kind of growth versus profit, I think one of the things that, a lot of people in e-commerce, particularly from the agency side, I think are guilty of is we get very obsessed with numbers like conversion rate. We get very obsessed with numbers about growth. I guess the thing is, ultimately, in reality, we know that, it's got to be thinking about margin as well. When you are, making those decisions and trying to get decisions through, how do you decide when to kind of chase the top line versus when you really need to defend that profit?
Yeah. So for me, like margin, kind of gross margin and contribution, kind of operating profit, they're fundamental, but they're outputs to the inputs, right? And I think that's always that key element. So, yes, we were always thinking from an ecom perspective in terms of that formula. You've got, unique visitors, conversion rate, average order value. They're the levers that we've got to pull. But in terms of the metrics from my perspective, the ones that I keep like a razor sharp focus on is CAC to LTV. Because that's the bit for me that starts to define, and I've learned over the time, defines really the profitability, kind of from an e-com business or any business really. So, cost per acquisition, yes, it can be incredibly expensive, and even now, that the price of a pouch of ambient gut health powder is £10. There or thereabouts. People typically buy maybe a bundle to save a bit, so we end up with an average order value of around about 17. If I look in terms of the cost per acquisition, particularly coming in from kind of Meta or even blended across each of the channels, it's closer to 30. So on a first order basis, I know I'm not going to be profitable.
Sure.
So therefore, I have to be razor sharp in terms of, okay, well, where is then that value coming from? How do I balance out that book, if you like, call it the debt that I'm building up in the P&L? And that's only through repeat purchase and getting people not just to convert once, but convert 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 times. And if I can start to push it out and I start to see CAC to LTV ratio of about 3 or 4 to 1, then from that perspective, I know that, kind of that's for me is pretty much then around about that break-even point.
I mean, I think, it's interesting because look, CAC to LTV is an important metric for us, particularly from an agency, because look, that can allow us to demonstrate the growth in that profitability. One thing I'm interested in though is, I think that look, LTV, the definition of that is sometimes quite woolly, I think, within the ecom community, particularly on brand side. Do you think the fact that, with obviously you guys at the moment being the fact you're an omnichannel retailer and you're in brick and mortar, does that concept, adoption of that concept from an ecom perspective, is that easier or more difficult because the fact that you're an omnichannel for you're the senior team to kind of get behind that?
So, I mean, it's kind of our business is kind of split as well, I guess. So, we don't, well, apart from through Amazon, we don't really do the kefir in terms of being ecom. So it's grocery.com and Amazon, just because of the distribution network. It's way, way, way too expensive for us to kind of look at and do from a D2C perspective. So we kind of split the business out between ambient and chilled. So within the ambient range, it's pure ecom. So it makes it much easier in terms of starting to understand, okay, so what's the 12-month LTV? And I work within a 12-month customer lifetime value as well, because it's an annual P&L for me. So it needs to balance by the end of that year. So that's a core part that starts to come into it. Within the chilled side of the business, again, what we can use from our ecom side, we can really start to understand what the repeat rate is. So again, we get a lot more data, not as much as we do within our own D2C channel, but we do get a lot more data, looking in terms of purchases, purchase frequency, kind of behavior. We can start to see a lot more in terms of, people upselling from, maybe they enter on a 500 ml format and then they quickly upscale into the 1 litre format. So again, kind of increases on the average order value. So for there, we utilize essentially the data in the formulas from the ecom side in order to then start to think about and apply that out across the retail side. So, kind of we take the application that, okay, repeat purchase rate, and frequency of purchase, how can we then actually apply that, even across like our point of sale shopper marketing, so we take the formula that we can, I guess, kind of calculate out to a degree of accuracy from the digital and the ecom world. And we can now sort of layer that over the shopper marketing, which has meant actually, even from that perspective, yes, you're right. What we can be doing now is thinking about, well, what's the true, ROI, if you like, and the true return of, kind of, spending out on our gut health base or, kind of running, kind of retailer specific activity.
I like that. It's interesting to think about it, because look, attribution is always one of those things that in e-commerce that is banged on about a lot, but I think it's great to sort of see that, in a way that's helping, not hindering, I guess, those in-store sales and trying to analyze obviously the impact there. I think the other side of this too is, sort of thinking about sort of margin versus profit. Has there been, or could you maybe tell us about a time this year where you said, look, actually, we just need to put the brakes on the spend here, because even though actually the growth potential here looks juicy from a profitability angle, maybe not so much?
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, I can go back. So our being a health brand, and kind of being where gut health is, like January, February, March for us, it's called the golden quarter. It's I know most other ecom brands are like, yes, and October, November, December is like kind of the big period, but actually for us, January, February, March is typically bigger. A lot more search volume in terms of gut health. A lot more people are interested in kind of healthy living. How are they going to change and shape their diet? So we have a huge opportunity, and when we start to run activity there, it gets good traction. We start to see good levels of growth. But what we also see is a increase in terms of cost, because it's not just us, every other health brand, and not just in gut health, they're all pushing similar messages, driving against the same target audiences, so there's a lot more noise, and kind of as such, the cost in terms of at all levels, through from the cost per conversion, cost per acquisition, cost per click, kind of cost per thousand on the awareness stuff, all of it goes up. And that's a challenge that we have to then sit there and try to work out and balance. Now, for me, from a D2C perspective, Kefir, kind of I'll put that to the side for the minute, but within the ambient, kind of gut health space, we're then against, every other type of food supplement, which is an area which has exploded, as we all know, over the last couple of years. And, we had to just look at it, and we had to go back in and go, do you know what? This is a prime opportunity for us to really push and drive our own ecom platform. But actually the cost of driving the traffic is now completely destroying, kind of the balance in the P&L. It's like, this is great, but actually the more we scale, the more it's just costing us off the bottom of our bottom line. So we made, and for me, which was a very difficult decision, because, kind of like, D2C is probably, kind of where I've been pushing and driving for, particularly over, kind of the last probably 10 years. But, the sensible decision was, well, actually look at the spend in Amazon. Right? Amazon is still delivering us, because there's an increase in people looking, because we're running our own outdoor, kind of a national advertising in and around that period, TV advertising. There's more brand searches coming through from Amazon. Our Kefir range only is with Amazon Fresh, so it only hits a certain, kind of percentage of their distribution and footprint. Like, but we could really drive forward, So it was a heart-wrenching moment, but I literally, shut the spend off from our D2C and lifted and shifted and put pretty much the whole lot into Amazon, and going into Amazon search in order to actually drive up and start to build some awareness out from that perspective. It fitted better from a P&L perspective. We were still getting, kind of a good level of ROAS. Yes, the fees are slightly more expensive and this profitability is slightly down, but actually the reduced cost per acquisition, kind of made it a lot more favorable from both a growth and from a profit perspective. With a view then that what we're hoping is that, kind of over the time, kind of people might then start to think about, well, let's learn a little bit more about the brand. Kind of let's, kind of get onto the brand.com site, and maybe we can start to think about how we balance that out afterwards. But I do know that once we get people on Amazon, pretty much they're sticking within that as a channel.
Sure. All right.
Yeah. Are they sticking within Amazon, or are they actually then going through to your own website as well after that?
So so far we're still pushing it's been working pretty well in terms of driving the Amazon side. So we've started to now, kind of as we came in around sort of May, start to shift some of that spend back again. But no, typically once we acquire a customer in Amazon, they're in Amazon, as it starts to come through. And we see that a lot of work across the other side as well. I mean, we launched TikTok Shop end of last year. And again, kind of we're pushing content, doing the lives, doing everything that needs to be done, pushing through the affiliate marketing. And we still see an increase in terms of people then, kind of maybe doing the brand discovery piece on TikTok, but still then actually going through to Amazon in order to make the purchase.
Yeah. Geez, that's interesting. It's still going through Amazon. Let's talk about the F word, and I'm talking about forecasting. As you mentioned earlier, we've been going through about 5 years of unprecedented times, I think is what all the politicians say. Does this, in your opinion, make forecasting basically worthless? Or is it still there? And what's your method for modeling your cash flow?
So I'll give you another F word, which is, fluid. So I mean, for me, forecasting is still an incredibly important task, even if you know, kind of in your hearts that it's going to shift and it's going to change. But there has to be some form of plan in terms of what are we expecting to happen based on it. We have but particularly within our ambient products, it's a 12-week lead time. So if I need more product, I've got to place the order, at least 12 weeks before I'm going to run out. Kind of, which is, again, current times quite a challenge. And at the same point, once you place the order, that's sunk cost. So we need to make sure that obviously we are balancing those two key things out. So, I mean, I still forecast. My forecast spreadsheet is, it's one I've had probably since agency times, in terms of, and then it's just been built upon. Running everything in terms of, based on the unit P&L in order to actually start to drive it out, driving a media plan, kind of promo plan, everything kind of, is input into the forecast model. And then I rigorously keep it up to date in terms of what results we're seeing. So, click-through rates, conversion rates, every time, every campaign, keep it up to date, keep the benchmark. So again, it just helps in terms of that kind of forward forecasting. It's a challenge, and sometimes you sit there and think, well, why bother? But I do think that, even without it, if you don't have it, I think even the process of forecasting forces you to start to think about, okay, well, actually, where is this going, and what is it going to start to look like, and what do I need to start to put in place? And if you're going to end up with a gap, what's that gap going to look like, and what type of activity can I be running in order to actually, kind of close that gap, kind of from a revenue perspective, or what type of initiatives do I need to start to put in place? Same in terms of resourcing as well. It's, when you're building a team, you're kind of pushing and running, but there's only so fast you can run before actually, kind of there's too much to do. So again, and finding the right people is a lengthy process. To start to bring in. So, again, from my perspective, the forecast is always there. One, in terms of, okay, well, what's the demand and what do we look like in terms of, from a supplier perspective, how is this forecasting out in terms of my revenue, in terms of, kind of where we're going to land, what do we need to be doing, and if costs are going up, do I need to be, kind of going to the board and asking for, kind of more spend in order to hit the targets that we're looking at it, or kind of how do we start to shape that out? Do I need to start to think about different channels? How do we start to shape it? Do I need to shift, kind of one platform to another? And then ultimately, what does the resource model look like? And what point are we going to start to need, kind of additional resources that's coming in? And I hope it's always that way around. And in which case, kind of what do we bring in? Do I bring in someone who's on an interim or a contract basis, or do I find someone who's a freelance basis in order to prove out the need and the requirement before we then go permanent, kind of, and what does that start to look like? So, yeah, fluid, an ongoing process. It's very much a living and breathing document. And I have to admit, the latest addition I made to my forecasting kind of document spreadsheet is a stress test. So ultimately, I now have a field at the top of it, which basically just runs me and allows me to very quickly put in plus or minus on a percentage, and it will literally then just change the metrics, like plus or minus 10% if I put it in, and show me what the impact of that's going to be. So again, I can start to now think about, okay, worst case scenario, ideal, most positive scenario, what does that look like? And then it gives me the opportunity to obviously communicate it internally as well.
Sounds like you need to turn your spreadsheet into a SaaS tool. I think there's a lot of people that find quite a lot of value in what you've built out there over those years.
Do you know what? Many years ago, I started to try and build it, and I did a lot of kind of tutorials through R, and then I was like, maybe that's not right, and I started to think about whether I could do it in Python. But finding the time to do it, it's maybe I need to find someone who can do it for me.
Rob, you mentioned gaps and trying to plug those gaps. So, with all these unprecedented times that we've had, which one of them blindsided you the most, and how did you plug that gap?
So let's say it's the thing that's blindsided me more than most has been the seasonality element to the world of gut health, kind of, and the impact that can then have. And it seems to be, kind of changing every year in terms of what that looks like. And I mean, and I say this year, kind of across the board. So looking even in terms of retail media from Kefir perspective, it seemed to have gone up like 3 times, or 3 to 4 times in terms of the cost, kind of, which is just huge. And, previous year when I was there, we looked and it was sort of doubled, so I planned on double, and then it was almost double the double. And you're just like, how on earth are you supposed to kind of keep going through this? And, particularly looking in terms of, let's say, from an awareness of driving traffic through to the websites, kind of, it can get pretty expensive. So that was the one that kind of really drive the most of me. Prior to making the decision, we did actually do something and started to look in terms of then, okay, well, kind of how could we counter this? So when I kind of deep into the analytics from a campaign perspective and looking in terms of our ROAS from a meta perspective, the cost was getting kind of bigger and bigger and bigger in terms of driving out the kind of the more kind of conversion and awareness pieces. But remarketing was actually doing really well still. It was still actually kind of helping and had pretty good ROAS, pretty good conversion rates that come off the back. So what we actually looked to do was then to flip and use some native advertising, so that lovely stuff that you get in like the Daily Mail and the Mirror, where it kind of looks like an article. People in your area have improved their gut health in 2 weeks, right? And what we found with that is that the cost in terms of actually driving out impressions and click-throughs to the website, kind of was a lot more cost effective at that period in time than it was going through social media and battling against kind of a lot of other supplement brands that were also in that same space. So what we did is we actually flipped. We started driving a lot more media through the native ad platforms, with the sole purpose of actually just getting people to click and get onto the website. So specific landing pages, all of the stuff that you should be doing, and then remarket to them, kind of through kind of Meta and through Google, and that as a balance then kind of really helped us actually kind of I guess bring that cost per acquisition down quite considerably, and bring it down to kind of around about the expected levels.
I mean, I think, Rob, you've talked a lot today about kind of decisions you've had to make kind of based on data and based on growth and profitability. I think one of the things that I want to go a bit deeper on this is that, has there been any kind of, I would say, very hard or almost kind of brutal decisions you've had to make this year, whether it be, I don't know, pricing, headcounts, cutting promo, and if so, kind of what was the sort of the logic and the thinking behind that?
Yeah, I'm going to come back actually. So the most brutal decision for me was the flip and changing in terms of a primary channel from D2C kind of through to Amazon. That again, I won't go back over the same ground, but it was kind of steeped in terms of actually kind of where it made sense for us to be pushing and driving our funding. But what it did mean is that we had to make kind of a considerable backward step, kind of cut in terms of a lot of areas. One of the alongside of that, which was kind of again an area I wasn't keen to, was we were looking at bring on board from a CDP perspective, but it was also the kind of no code personalization side across the website. And we were working on some really great kind of proof of concepts around how we could actually start to kind of really deliver that kind of one-to-one personalization as it started to go across. But as I started to look in terms of, okay, well, the cost of the traffic that's coming in, the way we're going to need to shift the business, again, that's going to have to be cut currently as a nice to have, rather than kind of rather than a number one business priority. So for me, that was really the downside. Thankfully, kind of we haven't, so within Biotiful, there's incredibly lucky on the Kefir side, I say, in terms of being number one brand, but also as a category, it's growing. Even in this tough climate and tough space, it's growing. We are seeing also in terms of being, kind of natural food, natural supplements, is an area that's growing. So, although, it's not all been, kind of positive, there's definitely always those challenges in terms of actually, kind of driving and pushing growth through the business. We have had a little bit in terms of that kind of, I guess that buffer that actually Kefir is just exploding at the moment. as it's coming in. Again, we've had new competitors come into the market this year, which are also, pushing and driving, and we are having to build and drive category growth as well as penetration that sits within it, which is obviously a challenge. But yeah, that has helped, I think, us, ride out, certainly some of the bumps in the road that we're seeing across other areas.
Well, and I guess, look, in terms of when you make the decision, I'm interested, I guess, in the operational kind of human side of it. Was that something that you kind of had to manage very carefully internally as a team? Because obviously you've been working in one very specific way. I guess, look, processes, focus of the business was changing. How did you kind of do that without sort of, maybe causing concern or sort of alarm or even kind of deteriorating morale?
Yeah, it's a challenge. So again, I might park Biotiful just for a bit because, my 4 years at Reckitt, again, we saw, kind of in terms of the elements with COVID up, but then everybody was home working and stuck into their houses. So, then it, although the growth was, kind of up in some websites, what should we say, the mental stability of the team was definitely being, kind of hit and impacted as it was for many others. And then post, kind of riding out COVID, we had huge expectations, based on the growth that was being seen over 2020 to 21, which then just didn't ride true as we started looking to, 21 to 22 to, and into 2023 as I sort of left. And, we did have to make hard calls in terms of, kind of what is the shape of the team? How does it look? How does it work? Even in that instance, there were a couple of markets where we had to go to and say, look, it's not making sense at the moment for us to be pushing and driving in this market. If you want to pick it up, take it internally, we can give you all the playbooks, we can support, but it's not going to be, kind of one that we can pick up and manage as a central team. And we had to look in terms of, okay, well, what are the roles, what do we need? And, and how do we make sure that the resource model fits, what we're looking to do, as we worked across each area of the business. So, a lot of tough conversations, kind of that were coming through. But, for me, it was about just making sure that the team always had a level of transparency in terms of what was going on, and kind of why these decisions were being made and what the impact of that was going to be. I mean, again, I'll take a lesson from, back 2007, 2008, kind of agency side. But, I think, as a business at that point, kind of it was, how do we try and protect people and jobs, which was a very, very much like within our DNA of what we wanted to do. And through that entire period, kind of we didn't make redundancies, we kept people on board, we didn't replace people as they then left or went on to find other roles. And it hurt, like it hurt the business, not just, immediately, but for a very, very long period afterwards. That was one of the things we sat there and went, actually now, to save a few, we've probably put in jeopardy the job of many. Now, kind of fortunately, kind of we were able to push and continue to ride and drive through there and start to build growth again, kind of by sort of, I don't know, 2010, 2011, something like that. But, there were certainly some very awkward conversations, and at that point I was, kind of director level. So, around the boardroom table, kind of around what it looked like. So, for me, it's about getting people to understand that, horrible as this kind of whole process is, it is unfortunately a necessary one.
Sure.
And try and make sure, and again, do it once. I think, the lesson out of that one for me was like, cut deep, cut hard, cut once, because you know what, actually it's easier to then re-rally a smaller group or a smaller team of people to then help them understand the impact and accelerate that growth out than it is to actually try and, I don't know, span it out over a period of time and essentially just, die slowly, from it, and be constantly having issues and challenges with everybody feeling, kind of unstable and, kind of maybe that, they should be looking, and then you'll lose the people you don't want to lose, that starts to come out of it. And then, kind of it makes it even more challenging to start to come through. So, it is tough. It's horrible. It's never a process, I think, is any leader ever wants to go through, or relishes the thought of having to go through. But you've really got to think about, okay, well, what does it look like? Because, again, that lesson for me from 2008 was, if you don't, if you don't make that decision, if you don't have that hard conversation, you know, kind of then actually it just prolongs the recovery, and yeah, just drags it out.
Oh, I think Peter's on mute.
I think
Hey, there you go. It's been a while since I've made that mistake. Tools and rituals. How do you keep the team laser focused on profit? I know you've mentioned you obviously got your forecasting spreadsheet. What other tools and rituals do you use?
So for me, my weekly meeting, you know, kind of is and has been since the beginning of Reckitt. As I said at the beginning, everything has to start with P&L. But it still does. Like, this is the P&L, this is the shape of it where we currently are at the moment, you know, kind of looking in terms of the current forecast, you know, this is what we're looking at, and this is the impact that that's then going to have that starts to come through. And again, it's that place around getting, you know, kind of the full team to understand that, you know, the P&L is not just for the finance team, like it's ours. Like, we have to take ownership over it. Like, what we do, the inputs we put into it, that has an impact in terms of profitability. You know, we can do, you know, 30% off discount or a 40% off discount or a 50% off discount when on our D2C channel, right? Because we're the retailer, pricing at that point and promo is completely up to us. But I like to make sure that the team understand, well, if you do, you need to understand the impact that's going to have. Like, so if you want to see, you know, an increase in volume with a deep promo, like, by getting them to understand actually what the uplift is we need from a volume perspective in order to cover the cost of that promo, I think just gets them thinking in a different way in terms of actually, you know, kind of as a business, you know, kind of how we need to manage our costs. You know, again, you know, it's coming in terms of, you know, even from a platform cost perspective, you know, there's loads of stuff that we want. I mean, you know, kind of predominantly on Shopify, there's always a new app, there's always something else that we could bring on, there's always a new interesting opportunity or something that we want to test, learn and trial. But again, it's making sure that they say, okay, well, if you're going to increase the cost base, you know, by, I don't know, 50, 100, 200 pound a month in terms of an additional cost, it's like, if you think about the margin on our 10 pound powder, like, how many of those extra do you need to sell just to cover that bottom line cost that's starting to come out? And I think for me, that's the trying to get the team to understand, and working with the teams that they do understand actually, you know, how everything is interlinked from a profitability perspective. Because again, you know, working in organizations and companies where that's not really discussed, you know, then you sit there and go, well, we need to get people to control their costs more. And it's like, well, you know, to them, you know, controlling their costs more just feels like we're being mean. You know, like, oh, you can't have this or you can't have that. But if you can get them to shift their mindset to think about, well, actually, if I do go forward with this, you know, this is actually going to be the longer term impact and cost on the business, then, you know, I think it helps them take a little bit of ownership and accountability around it.
Yeah, and then how do you align your agency and partner spend to your return on investment?
Yeah, I mean, again, for me, it's that key piece in terms of, okay, what are we looking to spend? You know, what is the marketing budget that we've got to look like? You know, kind of what do we need to be doing from a media perspective? What do we need to be doing in terms of then the agency perspective? And I guess, again, it's also, you know, kind of working, you know, kind of hand in hand with them in terms of saying, look, you know, kind of this is what we need to be hitting. Like, you know, kind of like, you know, these are, this is the ROAS that we need. This is the LTV, you know, kind of that we need. And, you know, there are some incredibly bright and brilliant minds that work within, you know, kind of the agency world. And I think, you know, I take a bit from my previous agency days when I wasn't necessarily given all of that information. You know, it was sort of, well, this is our internal business information, so we keep this over here, but, you know, we expect you to be a part of the delivery of it. Well, for me, it's like, I'll share it. I will quite happily, any agency I'm working with, you know, they can see my costs, they can look at the COGS, you know, kind of, they can look in terms of the logistics. I want them to also understand, actually, you know, kind of actually, you know, what is the cost of this business and how do we actually start to work together? And I think from that, then we get better responses, you know, we get a better proposal from the agency, because they're saying, look, hey, we could do it like this, or let's split the budget in this way. because obviously it's going to lend it much more, rather than just saying, oh, I'd like you to do some campaigns for me and I want you to hit a 3 ROAS or a 2 ROAS or, you know, kind of whatever it is, without them really understanding why what impact is. So yeah, for me, you know, kind of, like I say, being open, you know, obviously with all the right paperwork in place, shall we say, and giving my agencies and suppliers across anywhere, you know, kind of access to that information, then it means that they can come back and they can then truly be, you know, an extension to your business. And, you know, okay, my team at Reckitt was 28 people, but the team at Biotiful is not. It's much, much smaller. So, you know, there's a much more reliance upon, you know, kind of our agency and partners.
Do you sell stuff online? Then you need OmniSend. Yes, that OmniSend. The powerful yet refreshingly intuitive email and SMS tool that helps you make $73 on average for every dollar spent. Like watching steady lines go up and up and up? Just automate your email and SMS campaigns with OmniSend. Set it up once, then sit back and watch the sales roll in while you snooze. You're still awake? Then go to omnisend.com/ECC. Give OmniSend a try and start getting sales so steady they'll definitely put you to sleep. Don't forget to use code ECC30 for a 30% discount.
So Rob, there's probably people listening to this who are, you know, looking at you guys and saying, look, you've got omni-channel going, you're selling through different locations, physical, digital, and obviously experience I know has kind of been with that previously, and I guess sort of working agency side. What I was wanting to ask here is that in the event of, or when obviously downturns do happen, like we've talked about today, does that make it, does that protect you somewhat, or does it just give you more of a headache than it would have been if you were single channel?
So, yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And I think the answer is a bit of both, because operating across multiple channels does give you a lot more of a headache, particularly since, you know, they're not all our own channels. So, you know, you've got that balance between, you've got retail, you know, they are purchasing the product, it's their product, you know, pricing, promo is 100% at their discretion. And then we've got areas where we're the retailer and we're driving in. So you've got to balance that out, because, you know, you can't be, you know, kind of, you can't necessarily be doing, and, you know, we used to have this probably more so at Reckitt, where there's a direct comparison of, you know, I'd get phone calls from an angry, you know, from potentially an angry regional director going, oh, you've got an X promo on the website, and, you know, kind of our customers now saying that they want to be able to run the same element, or, you know, kind of X, Y, Z, but they can't make it work. So, you know, kind of, you have some of those conversations. So it can give you a bit more of a headache. But what it does do is it does help us, you know, kind of look, move and shift and be quite flexible in terms of actually, you know, kind of where are we seeing growth and within which channels at what points in time, and they're being able to kind of move and shift and double down in terms of driving and pushing budget through. So, you know, when we can start to see, you know, even from an online grocery perspective, you know, in and around times like over the winter time, you know, a lot of really bad weather, you know, kind of we started to obviously, you know, kind of see lots of yellow warnings coming out. You know, so again, all of a sudden we started to see, yes, a little bit of an increase in terms of online grocery, but QCom, like the QCom business was all of a sudden starting to just absolutely skyrocket, probably because people looked out the window and goes, oh, I don't want to go out of bed for breakfast. So that was it. They were, you know, Uber Eats, delivery, Just Eat, you know, kind of whichever platform. You know, so we started to, you know, kind of, again, we had the opportunity to move, lift and shift and put some more of our budget behind that in order to then, you know, kind of escalate and capitalize on that key growth, you know, whereas, you know, kind of now based on the summer, we see a slight downturn in terms of from the QCom perspective, you know, kind of as it's coming in. So yeah, being omni-channel gives us this opportunity to look at, okay, well, you know, based on certain conditions, you know, kind of an external or influencing factors, where are we seeing the growth? And then being able to like move and shift our approach in order to kind of capitalize on that, you know, kind of to the best ability, you know, rather than being able to go, oh, you know, I wish we were in, you know, why have we not capitalized on this one? And, you know, then going through the process of putting it in place.
Thank you. Awesome. Good to hear.
We're going to move to the Q&A and the quickfire questions now, Rob. So we're getting to the end. So first one we got for you there is best piece of financial advice you've ever heard.
best piece of financial advice I've ever heard. Well, that's a tricky one, but for me, the best piece of financial advice I've heard is know the numbers, right? Know the unit P&L, and don't kid yourself with them, because it's really easy, to kind of sit there and go, oh, well, if I look at, kind of X, Y, and Z, I'm going to take this, like, or I take out the average. It's like, don't, like, always plan to the worst possible outcome. Because if you know what the worst possible outcome is, right, and I'm ever an optimist, and I think maybe it's because I'm always looking at the worst possible outcome, it can only ever really, kind of be better position than that, because actually explaining to, kind of board level or C-level why something's done better is a much, much better position than explaining to them why something's done worse, kind of, based on what you were forecasting. So yeah, know your numbers, and don't kid yourself, like plan to that worst case scenario.
Awesome. And then on the flip side, worst piece of financial advice you've ever heard?
Ignore all the bad figures.
La 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 la.
Yeah. No, I mean, the worst piece of financial advice, I think it's the worst piece, and I shan't say where it came from, but it was just keep pushing and growing, and eventually the profit will come. Yeah, it won't.
Oh wow.
Keep going, hit the volume.
If only, Rob, if only.
Once you get this top level up to this level, all the rest will work through. It's like, no, it won't. That's the worst I've had. Yeah.
All right. Most overrated e-commerce growth hack right now?
I mean, I don't know if it's considered even a growth hack in a minute, but I mean, for me at the moment, this is just my own personal experience, and kind of people can hate me afterwards, but I've not felt really the benefit that some brands have had from, like, utilizing the affiliate network through social media, in particular, the main one being TikTok. For me, coming all through, working with, kind of, business, it's like, right, get it on there, get the samples out, people will create content. I mean, kind of when I started to look in terms of numbers, I'm like, the cost of the samples is way outrunning now, like the cost of actually getting this content just produced. As it starts to come through. So I know that there are brands that have done incredibly well through TikTok and TikTok Shop and all through this affiliate part, but kind of for us, I didn't see that. I didn't see that work. What I saw was just a lot of free orders going out.
That's interesting. One thing you wished you had done sooner when costs started climbing?
I mean, I'll come back. I go right back onto the, I say, from the agency days, this, but yeah, make the tough decisions quickly, because the longer you leave it to go on, just the more debt you've got to capture back from. So, again, this is why I monitor all of the KPIs, on a daily, weekly, kind of monthly, kind of basis, comparing against previous periods, previous year. And if it starts to look like it's going in the right way, set the time frame that you're willing. So if it's like, okay, let's see how this is going to go. I can see beginning of this week, it's down. Kind of it's breaking the trends of what we've seen across other weeks. I'm going to give it 3 more days, and after 3 more days, I make a decision. And it's not at that 3 more days, well, I'll give it another 3 more days or another 3 more days, because it's really, if you don't start to see an uptick or an upturn in it, then make that difficult decision straight away. And I often find that it's like, people get nervous about pulling spend, but quite often, kind of if you pull spend or you cut a channel, to start to then drive into it and rethink it. Like if you're relying on money coming in from that, right, it gives you a good kick or incentive and motivation to actually kind of get in there and do the replanning work. Kind of, and just pull everything together and really start to think about, okay, where is it? And every time I've done that with a team, like I say, cross all walks of life, really, the output then has been better, and the results that we've had have been better than just leaving it and hoping it's going to come back around.
Awesome. Finished this. Spreadsheets are?
Spreadsheets are everything. I think spreadsheets are a necessary evil. Let's put it at that. Like it's they seem to run everything. I mean, I see for some of the biggest platforms in the world, you seem to have to submit everything via an Excel spreadsheet. But yeah, they're a necessary evil. I think that Maybe I could come back on another one. We spent so many times when I was agency side, and this in terms of like, our own planning and forecasting and financials, of trying to find different platforms that would allow us to do all of the projections and everything else that would come into it. And I remember when I left, and one of my previous colleagues, who's the managing partner for creative, he's like, so what platform, do they use at Reckitt to do all the financials? And I went, a spreadsheet. In terms of actually then doing the analysis and coming out. So yeah, a necessary evil.
Right, and then the last one for you today: best book, podcast, or mentor for sharpening commercial thinking.
Yeah, I guess. Best book, podcast, mentor for sharpening the commercial thinking way to it. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, I like. I think that I use Medium a lot. I don't know whether that kind of fits in terms of best book or podcast or a mentor, but like for me, like Medium's probably my go-to to start to learn and find everything, because I like the fact that you get a lot of different like viewpoints, and it will cover pretty much every element, kind of that you're looking for. So if you're looking in terms of, new ways in terms of marketing or psychology or, kind of financials or commercials or, I find that for me, that's my go-to, I guess platform to start to search and then pull in. And again, I think I like it because then you can start to read through a lot of smaller snippets and start to then form your own opinion from it.
Awesome. Rob, thank you so much for joining us today. We've officially run out of time. We've gone 1 minute over here already, but really appreciate you walking us through what you're doing with forecasting and your financial sides and your experience and background in what you're doing here with your e-commerce roles and your broad experience.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, Rob, for being with us, like Pete said. And guys, thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed what you listened to today, do give us a like or a share on the social channel of your choice. And we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the eCom Collab Club podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, and join our community at ecomcollabclub.com/community.